Good morning. I'm State Representative Darrell Metcalf, Chairman of the House State Government Committee, and we are here today to talk about House Bill 153 and the last hurdle that stands between the voters and having the opportunity to vote on whether or not they would like to change their constitution to reduce the size of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives from 203 members to 151 members. There's a process that you have to go through for a constitutional amendment where you have to pass the same exact language 2 consecutive sessions before the voters actually have a chance to decide if they'd like to change their constitution in that manner. For the last this is the fourth session that I've been chairman of the House State Government Committee, and we have moved this legislation out of the committee over and over and over and over again. Last session, we were successful in finally getting the Senate to concur with us and move the legislation forward. So this session set us up to have the consecutive session where if we pass the exact same language, then the voters would get the opportunity to see if they want to change their constitution in this manner. Well, we passed legislation earlier this year, House Bill 153. Representative Knowles is the prime sponsor, and we passed that and we sent it to the Senate. The hiccup was that the majority of the membership in the House decided that they wanted to add language to it that wasn't there the last time, and that would be to have included the Senate in the language. Now, the version that was passed last time was just the House, and in order for the voters to see that language this year, it had to be the exact same language. Even though there might be some sentiments to reduce the size of the Senate, we needed the exact same language again. So we are thankful that the Senate saw fit before the end of the budget process to return the bill back to us with the amendment removed and the original language as it left the House last session restored. So we now have House Bill 153 in the language as it was passed last session that is now in the House and could be brought up for a concurrence vote for the full House's consideration today. And I'm going to introduce a number of my colleagues that are behind me to talk about what they would like to see occur and what's happened in the past, and to talk about this last hurdle that we'd hope to get over today to give the voters the chance in November to actually make a decision on whether or not they want to change their constitution to reduce the size of the Pennsylvania House by about 25%. The first speaker will be Representative Jerry Knowles, and he is the prime sponsor.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank all of you, particularly the State Government Committee, those who voted for this and have been very supportive of it, as well as the folks that are standing behind me. I also want to express appreciation to Speaker Terzai, Leader Reed, and Whip Cutler. They have been supportive of this initiative, and if it weren't for them working along with us, we would not be at the point that we are today. I also want to thank former Speaker Sam Smith. Sam worked for many years on this particular piece of legislation, and I thank him for his efforts. I'm going to make it pretty simple. The number 139. 139. That is the number of members who voted May the 5th of 2015 on this piece of legislation, was 107 Republicans and 32 Democrats. 139. I believe that's a pretty comfortable margin in terms of passing when you think about the need for 102. The second number is 117. And this is a very important number because these 117 members who voted for this in the last session are still members of the House of Representatives, and their names appear on that board upstairs. That would be 94 Republicans, 24 Democrats, a total of 118. But we have to remember that Mr. Cutler is away on military duty, so that's why I'm using 107, or Gobbler, I'm sorry. Representative Gobbler is away on military duty. But there are still 117 people that are sitting up on in that chamber that voted for this identical legislation last session. 102. That's the number of members that we need to vote yes to pass this. What has many of us confused in terms of why we can't get this across the goal line is because we have 117 members who voted for this identical last session. Identical. Along with that, there are a number of freshmen who've indicated to me that they support this legislation. Now, there are a handful of people who've been against it from the very beginning. I don't agree with them, but I respect that and I get it. But when we talk about this 117, I scratch my head. I just don't get it. I don't see how you could vote for something the last session and then not vote for the same legislation this session. Today's our day. We can get this over the goal line. People are giving various excuses. They're saying, they're talking about a number of reasons why this is a bad idea. Well, my answer to them would be, is to take a good look at the legislation and see what it does. It gives the citizens of Pennsylvania on November the 6th, it gives them the opportunity to make a decision under the Constitution as to whether or not this House should consist of 203 members or 151 members. It's that simple. That's what this bill is about. It's about giving people the opportunity to make a decision that they should be allowed to make. Clear and cut. That's what this bill is all about. There will be debates, if indeed this passes. There will be debates that will take place between now and November the 6th. I look forward to the debates. I can justify why I think this is a good idea, and I look forward to doing that. Again, and I also want to thank the media for coming out today, and I would encourage my colleagues, particularly those that voted for it the last session, to think long and hard. I've been working on this for years, and I can tell you that the people who are out there get it, and they're watching us, so I would strongly encourage all of the members to vote yes on House Bill 153. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Jerry Knowles. Our next speaker is Representative Rick Saccone.
Thanks, Chairman. Appreciate it. Great. Once again, the House entertains shrinking the legislature. This has been something that's been very important to me. I ran on this concept 9 years ago. Overwhelmingly, across this state, we've polled it so many times, the people of Pennsylvania overwhelmingly support it. I voted for this bill 5 times now. And here, hopefully, we're going to get a chance to put it over the goal line today. It's important to examine this subject objectively, and I'm going to lay out some of those arguments because Pennsylvania operates the largest full-time legislature in the country. The second largest legislature behind New Hampshire's 424 seat, but theirs is a part-time legislature. Ours is the largest full-time legislature in the country. That should be enough. That statement enough is alone ringing in the ears of our constituents back home. That's what they say every time I go around. There are too many politicians in Harrisburg, and they're right. There are too many. And I'm going to lay out why I think it should be smaller. I visited 14 state legislatures since I've been in office in the last 8 years to study the various systems out there. And I've spent a lot of time talking to legislators in other states. And it's through that lens of comparison that we can see the blemishes of our own system and why it needs to be corrected. So let's take a look at a few other legislatures. Our neighbor in Ohio, which is nearly equivalent in population, and it's a rural state. Governs with a 99-member state house. 99 members to our 203. They each represent roughly 120,000 residents per representative. So a smaller legislature is not impossible for a state our size. I visited that legislature and observed how it functioned. There is much less chaos and much more robust debate, actual debate there on the floor of the House. Most constituents, and I know the media, they're familiar with this because they're there every day, when they visit our assembly, they immediately notice the chaos on the floor and how few people even seem to be paying attention to the speakers as they're speaking. There's really little debate. People are off doing other things. They're really not listening. When you go to Ohio, it's very polite. Each member seems to be listening. They get called on one at a time. They listen to each other. There's actual debate on the floor because there are fewer members there. 99 members. We can also examine Illinois, the 5th largest state in population, just ahead of us. Slightly larger in size. It also functions effectively with only 118 representatives. You may remember I invited one senator from that great state here to speak to us on the 150th anniversary of the Gettysburg Address. He happens to occupy Abraham Lincoln's old seat there, and he came and spoke at our ceremony then. And then there's New York, the 3rd largest in population and slightly larger than us in size. They operate their house with 150 representatives and 62 senators. Again, the 3rd, 5th, we're the 6th, the 7th. All the states near us in population and size operate with a much smaller legislature. My rural colleagues say that a smaller legislature will hurt the rural districts. And I would offer even one more compelling example to dispute that, and that would be Montana. Montana is an appropriate example of the rural-urban argument. Montana is the 4th largest state geographically, 147,000 square miles, just under 1 million people in 56 counties. A quarter of its population is in 4 cities concentrated there. They function effectively with 100 representatives and 50 senators, and they're a part-time legislature. I visited that legislature and talked with senators and representatives. They feel rural Montana is well represented with fewer members. Other colleagues contend that Pennsylvania is a diverse state, and we are. But it's interesting that when you talk to reps in other states, they also argue that their state is uniquely diverse. Ohio is a rural state with concentrated populations in large urban areas such as Cleveland and Cincinnati. Illinois is a rural state with a large concentration in Chicago and surrounding counties, yet both operate effectively with a smaller legislature. Now, some colleagues say we should have a larger legislature. They actually say that. Some are out there thinking we should have more. Larger is better, they say. Voice of the people. We need more legislators. But when you go up to New Hampshire with that 424-member assembly, you see that each legislator there has a smaller voice. More power is shifted to leadership there to run such a large bureaucracy. And individual legislators are neutral, and I think neutered, and each one of those is, I think, represents around 5,000 people. Others argue that a larger legislature cuts down on corruption and is difficult for lobbyists to influence a larger number of legislators. In fact, the opposite is true. A larger assembly places the power in the hands of a few leaders, so lobbyists need only influence those leaders to get their way. I also want to briefly address here the idea of a part-time legislature, which I'm not opposed to. We don't address that in this bill, but I think it relates to what we're doing here with the size of the legislature. I want to use Texas as an example, because Texas provides some inspiration in this regard. It carries the title of our 2nd largest state in both size and population, but it's a part-time legislature. Consider that a state nearly 6 times the size of Pennsylvania and 2.2 times the population rules with a mere 150 House members compared to our 203. And they meet every other year for 3 months and pass a 2-year budget. And they have the reputation of getting things done in Texas. So if a state that big can do it successfully, we might want to study how Texas can pull that off. PA was a part-time legislature at one time, and I just want to remind you there are trade-offs for that. We're not talking about that today. But under a part-time legislature, more power rests in the governor. I don't think, especially right now, we want to give more power to the governor. Our state has an active legislature that represents the people directly and is a strong counterbalance to the executive and the bloated bureaucracy. Finally, at least a few colleagues tout the fact that the number we represent is small enough that we can personally touch each constituent. I agree. And I have knocked on nearly 40,000 doors in the last 4 elections. My wife and I routinely attend over 200 local events a year in our district. But under this bill, our districts will become only slightly larger and will remain a size reachable by the representative willing to work it. Around 80-some thousand is what we would represent as opposed to 63,000. Still less than Ohio's, remember. What is the optimal number for our state? There's nothing magical about the number of 203. We know from the briefings we had here a couple years ago that number's arbitrary. It just came up. There was no thought really given to that number. We can safely say an effective number lies somewhere between 100 and 175 members for a state our size. We can learn from Ohio. We can learn from New York and Illinois and other states, but we don't have to be them. That's why we have a good compromise bill here, reducing the size of the legislature to 151 members, which, looking at it objectively, is much more reasonable than the 203 we have right now. We can set our own standards within those guidelines. And that makes the proposed number of 151 a reasonable number, as I said, for a state our size. Still others argue, well, not much money will be saved. And that's relatively true. It's not all about the money. We'll likely save in the tens of millions, not hundreds of millions. And some say, well, if we have bigger districts, we'll just have more district offices and the amount will go up. We don't necessarily have to do that. These other states that are part-time legislatures and are smaller than us, they don't even have district offices. Some of them don't even have offices in the capital. There's no reason why we need to expand our district offices just because we reduce the size of our districts. The larger argument is about effectiveness, not just cost savings. And some argue that it's not the legislature, but the bureaucracy that needs reducing. I agree, 100%. But it's not an either-or argument. We can work on both, but we also need to reduce our legislature. In the end, the people desire a smaller legislature, and there is sound justification that our legislature is just too large. Remember, this legislation must pass the House and Senate in 2 different sessions, and we're almost there. We're at the last step of this process. To hold it up now and not vote it when we're this close to letting the people have their say would be unconscionable at this point. The people want this, but they don't believe we'll do it. I hear about back home all the time. They always say, you'll never vote yourselves out of a job. You politicians up there, you don't want to vote yourselves out of a job. And I always tell them, I've voted 5 times now to vote myself out of a job. But there's still opposition to it here. It's time we do what the people want. We need to bring this bill up today. We need to vote it and get it on the ballot for the people to decide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Rick Saccone. Our next speaker will be Representative Menser.
Thank you, Chairman Metcalf, and special thanks to Representative Knowles for bringing this legislation up. This legislation places the question of reducing the size of the House, speaks directly to Pennsylvania's self-rule governance. The question is, are we going to allow the people of Pennsylvania to vote on exactly how they are governed? This requires a constitutional change and goes directly to the root of our democracy. I think we can all agree the form of self-governance used in the United States and Pennsylvania is far superior to any in the world. The question is, who gets to choose if we have a bicameral form of government or a unicameral form? Who gets to choose if we have 203 members of the House or 151 members? If we go back to the origin of our country, there's no question. It's the people. The people decide. The question before us is not, is the legislature going to vote to reduce the size of this body? The question is, are we going to allow the people of Pennsylvania to cast that vote? I certainly hope we're not going to obstruct their ability to decide their own form of governance. The arguments for and against the reduction of the size of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives should be made to our constituents, not to legislators, not legislators arguing back and forth. The people should have the opportunity to make their decision based on our ability to communicate our position to them. Denying the people of Pennsylvania the right to vote on how they will be governed, I believe, would be a very big misstep and have consequences. We are so close to having this question placed on the ballot. Let's move this legislation and give the people of Pennsylvania the opportunity to decide how they are governed. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Menser. Next is Representative Seth Grove.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank former Speaker Sam Smith for his leadership. He's the one that brought this initiative to the House. After he left, I'd like to thank the new Prime sponsor, Jerry Knowles, for taking up the mantle. When the House Republicans took back the majority of the House back in 2010, 2011 session, this was one of the promises that was made to the residents of Pennsylvania, that we would put on the ballot an initiative to reduce the size of the House. That time was 153 members through the process and through some speakers commission that Sam put together to educate the members on how we got to 203 versus 201 or whatever other number came up. It was put up and 151 members was set in stone, and that's what we should be voting on this on today moving forward. But it was a promise to the people. I don't think not putting this up today, I think breaks that promise. It took a little while to get the exact same language passed. It took a while to ensure that we were in the position we are today. There are many delay tactics and amendments filed to change that, and it's not Republicans or Democrats that wanted that change. It was bipartisan support and bipartisan opposition. And really, does it come down to, do you believe that people should have a choice and have a say in how big their government is? And not to reiterate my colleagues who have spoke, but we do have the largest full-time General Assembly in the country. Going back to taxpayers and to residents and saying we have the option of reducing costs, reducing the size, and providing a leaner, more efficient government management system, I think speaks well of both Republicans and Democrats. I don't know anybody that goes out there and look at election time and says, I'm for more bloated, larger government that's slower and can't operate efficiently. No one says that. So today, we can have the option to put on the ballot to reduce the size of government, to streamline the House, make it more efficient, provide cost savings. I know I can operate my district, my office expenses at the same cost currently provided. I know we can do that because we believe in efficiency in government. So I'm just here to join my colleagues and urge the House leadership to put up the vote. Obviously, the Senate did us a huge favor by removing an amendment to add themselves. If they want to reduce their size, they can, but I think the data shows across the state, our state Senate is probably the right size of where it should be. So hopefully our leadership will put it up. Whether passage or failure, I think the residents of Pennsylvania should have the option of voting this November on the size of the House. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Grove. Next will be Representative Brad Roy.
Good morning, everyone. In Pennsylvania, we have one state representative for every 63,000 people. Now, to put that in comparison, if the state of California had one state rep for every 63,000 people, they would have a 627-member state house. They have about 40 million people in California, and they get by with 80 state representatives. Here in Pennsylvania, we have 13 million people, and we have 203 representatives. I don't think we need that many. But what House Bill 153 does is it allows voters to decide, can we get by with 151 instead of 203? All we have to do to pass this today is to have the same people who voted for it in the last 2-year session to vote for it again today. All the people that voted no 2 years ago, all the members elected since 2 years ago, they can all vote no, and we still have enough votes to pass this. In Harrisburg, as we all know, the magical numbers, 102, 26, and 1. Well, with this, we don't even need the 1 because the governor doesn't have to sign this. The voters decide. So the Senate already put up their 26 votes. All we have to do is put up 102 votes today, and we can send this on to the voters of Pennsylvania to decide. A very important thing in Harrisburg is to have the support of leadership to get anything done. Our leadership team is a very capable and very effective leadership team. All you have to do is search on the internet. You can see that Speaker Turzai has come out in support of this. Leader Reed has come out in support. Whip Cutler has come out in support. Appropriations Chair Saylor has come out in support. I've come out in support. As a matter of fact, if you search on the internet, you can find these for 117 people. There's 118 people. Representative Gobbler is on National Guard duty. He got deployed, so he can't be here today. But we have 117 members that voted on this 2 years ago. They all sent out press releases like this. They all put in their campaign flyers. They had on their websites. They posted to social media. Plus, our senior leadership team is behind this. So we can absolutely do this. Just some random quotes from the 118 people that voted for this. Many employers have had to cut back during these hard times. I think it's only appropriate that we look at downsizing the state legislature. Another person said, one of the requests we hear is that they want to see more efficiency from our state government. Tuesday's vote shows that members of the State House are listening to those concerns. Here's another quote. I support the legislation because it will reduce the size of government in Pennsylvania and will give citizens a voice in the process. Since 2012, I have voted to shrink the size of the legislature and continue our work to right-size Pennsylvania's government as folks tell us they want. I'm not going to read you quotes from all 117 people, but you get the point. If you're bored, you can Google search it and find them yourselves. But we have 117 people that have been making statements like that, and today we need 102 people to vote to put this over the finish line. So I urge our leadership team to bring this up for a vote. Let those 117 people that were in the House 2 years ago and voted for it, let those same 117 people vote for it again today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Brad Roy. And thank you to my colleagues who all have made very good points and good arguments on why we should see this called up for a vote today. The Senate voted both sessions to advance this language. Last session, it was a vote of 43-6. This session, it's a vote of 42-7. So more than 80% of the Senate, bipartisan support, voted to advance this legislation. In the House, last session when we considered it, and this was before everybody was up for re-election, of course, the last time around, we had, as was stated, 139 yes votes, 139. So we had more than 2/3. We had veto-proof majority for that vote, which we don't need because the governor's not in play for a constitutional amendment. He gets to vote on it like every other citizen if it's put on the ballot. So we just need the House and the Senate to pass the same language, 2 consecutive sessions. 139 votes last time. 107 Republicans, 32 Democrats voted yes. As it left the House this year, we had 94 Republicans vote yes, 7 Democrats vote yes. We lost 7 Republicans this time around that were here last time. 7 of the Republicans that voted yes last session voted no this session on the way out the door to the Senate. So 7 Republicans changed their vote out of the members that were still here that voted the previous session. 14 Democrats changed their vote. twice as many Democrats with a lower number of Democrats in the chamber, so a greater percentage of Democrat members changing their vote. Twice as many Democrats changed their vote and said no this time on the way out the door after having won re-election last time and having cast a vote for this, indicating to the people that they would be supportive of this measure. Now, what we have before us today, when you look at the members that are here, as was said, 117 members still here, but even with the members that voted as this left the chamber right now, if everybody votes yes, that voted yes to send this out, we had 101 yes votes earlier this year because we were missing a few members, so we needed 101. We had 101 members that voted yes, so we need to get to 102. So we have a Democratic member who wasn't here this time but was here last time. He voted yes. If he's here today, he votes yes. We've got the 102. We have some special elections that brought in a few new people. If one of those members casts a yes vote, we have the number needed to get this over the goal line today. Now, as you saw this sweep through the elections last year and this call to drain the swamp in D.C., we have our own little swamp here in Harrisburg. And I think as you talk to people, I think what they see as part of the swamp is a lack of integrity in people who are supposed to be serving their fellow citizens in a leadership capacity. Today is all about integrity. The Senate showed integrity by giving us back the legislation that we have now sitting in the House to be considered. As was mentioned, Representative Roy mentioned all of our leaders that are in support of this. They all have showed integrity in supporting this through the process. Sam Smith showed integrity in pushing this prior to his leaving for a number of sessions and trying to put the power of his office behind it, calling together a symposium, trying to educate. He showed integrity trying to move this forward. Right now, we have two hurdles. The first hurdle is this needs to be called up for a vote today. And I am calling on our leadership team to make this happen today. The people of Pennsylvania deserve the opportunity to see who has integrity in this body. If the leadership does not call this vote up today, it rests on them. They will be the ones responsible for not allowing this to be called before the voters in November. If our leadership fulfills their duty, and if they carry out their charges, their responsibilities of their office with integrity, then they will bring this vote before the full membership of the House today. I call on the Speaker to keep us on the floor today until this is called up. I call on the leader to call this vote up today, to schedule this vote, to bring this bill up before the membership today. There's a lot of backroom operations going on. There's been a lot of activity on the floor. There's been members that have been against this, whipping the vote, trying to whip and trying to change people's minds and get them to vote against it. We need our whip's office to exercise his duties with the integrity that I know he has and whip this vote into a vote that brings this to bear today for the voters of Pennsylvania. If our leadership brings this up for a vote and the individuals choose not to support this measure today that they have indicated last session and that they have indicated this session they support, and on this final hurdle they say no, then they will expose themselves for lacking the integrity that people are demanding of their public servants. So we are here today to call on our leadership to bring this up for a vote. Exercise their duties of office with integrity. We are calling on our colleagues who, looking at past roll calls, have said yes and who show us that we have the numbers here to pass this. We are calling on our colleagues to show integrity and allow the people of Pennsylvania to make this decision in November. This is going to expose those who don't allow this or those who don't vote for this as being the ones who people have a problem with in politics. We need a vote today, and we need our colleagues to step forward and exercise integrity and vote the way they've indicated from past votes that they will vote, and that's to allow the people of Pennsylvania, the citizens of Pennsylvania, to decide, as Representative Menser had stated, to decide how their form of government will be. Do they want 203 members or do they want 151? I think they'll vote 70+% to go to 151. And that's why some of my colleagues are now switching gears, because they fear they might be out of a job. Show some integrity, because unless you show integrity, you don't deserve the job. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, if this was so important, why did you sit on it for a year in committee?
We didn't sit on it for a year in committee. We've run this for 4 sessions in a row. There's a scheduling process to moving legislation and working with the prime sponsor, working with leadership to get a vote. So we just had to get it out by the end of session. It's been over in the Senate for quite some time. They just sent it back to us last week. So the bill has been worked on through 4 sessions, and we have worked hard on this bill, and you prioritize legislation. So for anybody that works at the Capitol for any period of time, you understand that.
So in your mind, you're just down to one vote that you need?
We need 1 vote. If we get the leadership to put this up for a vote, then that will expose the members of this body for those who have integrity, those who don't, and those who have been consistent. There's some members that have voted against us in the past, both times, and they're showing consistency, and their constituents know that, and they have their reasons. But for those that indicated last time they were going to support this, and even now, and then behind the scenes, they're calling on leadership not to call this up for a vote, that shows a total lack of integrity, and it should never occur.
Some members, specifically some Democratic members, have brought up concerns that getting rid of 50 members but not having redistricting reform go along with it could lead to 50 members just kind of getting, it won't be random, they'll be picked, they'll be targeted by when you get rid of people in this. Do you share that concern, or do you understand that concern?
Well, I think the arguments that they're proffering that they need redistricting reform at the same time is a bogus argument. It wasn't moved last session at the same time when they supported it. Those that are saying that are switching gears now, it wasn't moved this time when they supported it leaving the chamber this year. So you just have to look at the voting histories. And those are 2 different questions that would be changed in 2 different constitutional amendments, and the people would get to decide in both of those different questions whether or not they want to change. It's not something that would happen. And the people might reject one and not the other if you did have both questions on the ballot at the same time, but certainly not questions that need to be run at the same time, nor are they. We just need to have these individuals stop making excuses and show some integrity. Representative Knowles?
Some people are trying to tie this in with redistricting. Redistricting is a completely different issue. And whatever happens with redistricting is going to happen whether there are 203 or 151 members. It's going to happen. Other people, it's kind of ironic because at the same gathering, I heard someone from Philadelphia say, I can't go for this. This is terrible for the city. They're going to lose representation. At that same meeting, a member from rural Pennsylvania said, I can't go for this. This is bad for rural Pennsylvania. You know, I just don't quite get that, because everything that is done in terms of going to the 151 number, it will be done proportionately. It will be done proportionately. And this is not about redistricting. I go back to this, and people get sick of hearing me say this. This is about denying the citizens of Pennsylvania the right to decide. We have people who sit around and they preach about how they believe in the Constitution. Well, guess what? These people are entitled. They have a constitutional right to decide if this House of Representatives should consist of 203 and 151. I'm appealing to all of my colleagues. Let's not deny them of that. Let's not deny. They're entitled to that. They deserve that. We can educate them between now and November, and then let them make the decision.
Yes, sir.
Is it fair to read this news conference as a sign of desperation? If it was just a matter of calling on the leadership to do it, you could have done that in another setting. And I mean, this is at the last minute. Do you have reason to feel so pessimistic that it's not going to be called up today?
I sent a text message to the leader and the speaker last week calling on both of them to bring up 153. Of course, the speaker has to call us in a session. The leader's the one who schedules it. So I'd sent a text message last week to both the leader and the speaker. And I spoke to the leader on the floor. I've spoken to the chief of staff for the speaker. Spoken to the whip. We've been conveying our wishes behind the scenes as we've watched some of our colleagues working behind the scenes trying to stop the vote. So as we move toward this final, what appears to be most likely the final day of voting before we recess for the district session coming before us in the summer, this is our last opportunity. It has to be done before the beginning of August, 90 days prior to the election. You have to advertise for a constitutional amendment. So this has to be done before we leave to make it happen, unless we'd be called back, and that's very unlikely.
What did they tell you? Did they text you back? Did he tell you on the floor, sure, I'll bring it up on Monday?
I've not received an indication that we are going either direction. I know there's been a whip count going on, and there's been activity, conversations among members. But as we left here Friday, that's what I talked to some of my colleagues, Representative Knowles, about having this press conference today to alert the public that this is the last opportunity, and to try and create more discussion publicly and in the halls of the Capitol and on the floor today. So I think if our leadership wants to show that we have integrity amongst our leadership team, which I think they do have integrity, I think they do want to show that, then they should call this up today. And if the members that are going to vote on this are okay with showing their constituents that they don't have any integrity, then they'll cast a vote different than what they originally cast and have misled their constituents in the process of it. Representative Saccone?
Yes, thanks. Like, I had every reason to believe that this bill would be brought up before we adjourned for the summer. I had. I have doubts today. I don't see it on the calendar. Who would think that a bill this important, that we've overcome every hurdle except this last one, would not be brought up when we've all agreed on it for 2 straight sessions? That we wouldn't put this to the vote of the voters. Let them decide. And I tell you, if we don't bring this up today, I think they should extend us to tomorrow or bring us back to make sure that we vote this in time to get it on the ballot in November. Force the members to stand up. Show themselves. Let the taxpayers see where they stand on this issue, because overwhelmingly across this state, the taxpayers favor it. It's time to put this up for a vote. And I'm still hopeful that it'll come up for a vote today, but if it's not, we should extend till tomorrow. And we need the help of the media. We need people to get out there and say, get the people understanding what's at stake here.
Hypocritical since they've issued these statements saying that they support this, and then if they don't allow this vote to happen?
Well, our leadership has an opportunity today to bring this up. And as I said, right now, the next obstacle is getting this called up on the floor. And that's in the hands of the leader, and it's in the hands of the speaker to make sure we're here to have that scheduled. Beyond that, then it's the responsibility of the members to cast the vote for it. So we have 2 hurdles, as I said. One, first, it's got to be called up. Second, and we need to see the votes to pass it. And I think both actions will expose individuals who might not cooperate with what I believe the will of the electorate will be. Representative Knowles.
None of us agree on everything. I'm laying the blame at this problem on those 117 members who voted this last session because they never thought it would come up this session. Well, guess what? It's time to man up and face the music. Now, when you talk about leadership, I've worked with leadership. Each and every one, the leader, the speaker, as well as the whip support this. But let's be upfront, folks. They can count. We don't just bring up votes for the sake of bringing up votes. I am certain that if this, and I'm not sure what the whip count looks like, but if this gets within 5, maybe even 10 votes that they think it can pass, I think it'll run, and I think it will pass. Because I think there are people who are hiding back in the weeds, that don't want to run this. They don't want to run this. Well, guess what? That's not my problem. That's their problem. They're the ones that voted for it last session, and I would think they would have voted for it because they thought it was the right thing to do. So I'm calling on those folks to contact leadership and tell leadership that they're going to vote yes on this so that leadership will bring this up.
You know, the only vote that's hidden here in the Capitol is our votes for leadership. It's the only votes that the people don't get to see us cast, which I think they should. I think they ought to be able to see a public record of who voted for who for leadership. It's the only vote that's hidden. But because of that, it leads into this type of environment that is swampish, where you think that members can play games with their voters. They can tell them one thing at home, and then down here behind the scenes, they can whisper in the ears of their leaders, don't make us vote that. Don't bring that up. We don't want to be exposed for not really supporting that. We've been saying we support that back home. And that's what's going on right now. As Representative Knowles said, 117 members that supported this last session are here still. 117 members, if they supported it last time, they should be supporting it today. They should be speaking out and saying they want this bill run. And I think it's a responsibility of leadership to expose dishonesty, to expose a lack of integrity. I don't think it's the responsibility of leadership to shield and to provide political cover for those who want to mislead, deceive, and not show integrity in the process of exercising their duties. So I call on our leadership to bring this to a vote today, expose those individuals that are willing to show that they don't have integrity, and give those 117 members an opportunity to at least deliver 102 that are going to have integrity, and give the voters their will in November to vote on this and to choose to do what they want with the size of their House of Representatives. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.